Using this elevation graph, we are going to answer the next three questions. The first one is, what is the change in elevation between campsite 1 and 2? Then, what is the change in elevation between campsite 2 and 3? And finally, what is the change in elevation between campsite 3 and 4? Now, our first step to this problem is going to be to label what each campsite is. This one is going to be campsite 1. Next, we're going to move down to campsite 2, 3, and then 4. So now that we've labeled our picture, we can move on to question 1. We have to find the change in elevation between campsite 1 and 2. Now the key words are change in elevation. This means we have to subtract the elevation at campsite 2 by the elevation at campsite 1. So to find the elevation, we find campsite 2, and then we move along its axis to see where the elevation is, which is at -2. So first we want to write the elevation at campsite 2, which is -2, subtract the elevation at campsite 1. So we go to the graph and we see at campsite 1 the elevation is going to be 0. So then we just subtract 0. And then we get -2 minus 0, so we're left with an elevation of -2. So our answer to our first problem is going to be a change in elevation of -2. Next problem asks for what is the change in elevation between campsite 2 and 3. So again, we have to find the elevation at campsite 3 and the elevation at campsite 2 and subtract them from each other. The elevation at campsite 3, as we can see from our graph, is at -1. So we write -1 minus the elevation at campsite 2, which we knew from the previous problem to be -2. So minus -2. And we know that when we subtract a negative, we're left with addition. So we have -1 plus 2, which leaves us with a change in elevation of +1. So the answer to the second question is +1. The final problem asks for the change in elevation between campsite 3 and 4. So again, we want to find the elevation at campsite 4 and the elevation at campsite 3 and subtract them from each other. So using our graph, we go to campsite 4 and we move all the way along its axis to find the elevation is at +2. So we write +2, subtracted from the elevation at campsite 3, which we knew from the previous question to be -1. So minus -1. And we know that minusing a negative number leaves us with addition, so we have +2 plus 1, which gives us +3. So the change in elevation between campsite 3 and 4 is going to give us +3.